You have entered a place where silence remembers, and the dead still whisper. Welcome to Whispers of Asia, a channel that brings you spine-chilling ghost stories and cursed folklore from across the East, where ancient rituals are never truly forgotten and restless spirits still linger in the shadows. Tonight, we travel to rural Thailand, where grief becomes a prison and a mother's love becomes the chain that binds a soul. They say a funeral portrait is meant to honor the dead, but what if it traps them instead? This is the story of The Girl in the Funeral Portrait, a cursed photography, unfinished spells, and a child spirit that refuses to let go. Now listen, and don't look behind you.
The air in the house had changed. It wasn't the kind of change you could point to, not with your eyes, not with your hands. It was something in the silence, a thickness, a weight. The house breathed slower now, like it too was in mourning. And at the center of that silence, beneath the flickering orange light of a single candle, hung a photograph that no one could look at for too long. A funeral portrait. It showed a girl, no older than 10, dressed in her white school uniform. Her hair was neatly tied into 2 short braids, her hands folded gently in her lap. She smiled with the kind of quiet grace only the dead could muster. Her name was Dao. Rachani, her mother, lit another incense stick and bowed her head until it almost touched the worn wooden floor. The family altar was simple, old. Nestled in the eastern corner of their wooden house in Suphanburi, it had held generations of ashes, offerings, and silent prayers. But now, all of it, the candles, the faded flowers, the unopened bottle of strawberry-flavored milk, all of it belonged to Dao. The scent of jasmine and sandalwood filled the room. Rachani whispered the same words she had whispered for the past 7 nights. "May you be safe. May you find peace. Don't be afraid." Her voice trembled at the end. She wanted to believe the words. She wanted them to mean something. But no mother believes in peace after burying her child. She rose slowly and looked up at the photograph. Dao's smile was still there, soft, still, a little tilted, but Rachani's breath caught in her throat. Something about the eyes. She blinked, leaned in. Maybe it was the candlelight, or maybe the varnish on the photo had caught some dust. But Dao's eyes, they looked sharper tonight, more focused, as if they weren't staring into the distance anymore, but at something or someone. She shook the thought away. Grief played tricks. She'd read that. She'd been told that. Everyone had their own way of seeing ghosts, and sometimes ghosts were just shadows made by sadness. Still, she covered the photo with a cloth before she turned off the lights. That night, the sound began. It started with a creak, wood against wood, the sound of the hallway floorboards expanding under pressure, except no one was walking there. Then came the second sound, pat-pat, pat-pat. Bare feet, small, quick, like a child running barefoot over old teak floors. Rachani sat up in bed. The ceiling fan spun lazily above her, groaning with each turn. Her husband, Pricha, snored slowly beside her, undisturbed. The clock on the wall read 2:13 a.m. Then came the laughter. High, breathless, giggling, like a child playing hide-and-seek behind the doors. Rachani rose slowly, pressing her feet to the cold floor. She didn't call out. She didn't dare. She walked barefoot through the dark hall toward the altar room. The candle had gone out. The cloth that covered the photograph was folded neatly at the altar's base. And the portrait? Dao's smile was gone. The next morning, Rachani didn't mention what she had heard or seen. She watched the others, her husband, her elderly mother-in-law, Dao's younger cousin, go about their routines as if the world hadn't shifted overnight. Maybe they hadn't heard the footsteps. Maybe the laughter had only lived in her own ears. But when she passed the altar again, she paused. Dao's expression was no longer peaceful. Her lips were closed, straight. The warmth behind her eyes had cooled. It wasn't drastic. No one else seemed to notice. But Rachani did. A mother always knows when her child is not at ease. That evening, a neighbor came by to offer condolences and brought a box of bananas and incense. She glanced at the photo and offered a polite smile. "Beautiful picture. Almost looks like she's still here." Rachani nodded, keeping her eyes low. "She is," she wanted to say. "She never left." The whispers began on the 5th night. They were faint at first. A syllable here, a breath there. Her name sometimes. Other times just giggles. Like Dao was standing just outside the door, waiting to be let in. Rachani didn't sleep. She couldn't. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw her daughter's face, but not the one in her memory, the one in the portrait, the one that was changing. She searched the house for the camera, the one they had used for Dao's funeral portrait. It wasn't her favorite photo of Dao. In fact, she hadn't remembered ever seeing it before the funeral. Her sister-in-law had arranged the printing, saying that it was the best one she could find. Dao's body had been cremated just 2 days after the accident. Everything had happened so fast. Rachani was barely able to process it all. But where was the original? She checked every drawer, every shelf. She asked her husband. He shook his head. "Didn't your sister have it?" But her sister hadn't come to the funeral. Only her aunt had, Buapan. Rachani's hands trembled. Buapan, her mother's sister, had once been known in the village as a Mo Ying, a female spirit medium. But years ago, after a possession ritual went wrong, she had retired from the practice. She rarely left her home, spoke little, and warned Rachani never to meddle with spirits. Why had she come that day? Why had she been the one to bring the photo? On the 7th night, something woke Rachani. Not a sound, a sensation. She opened her eyes and saw Dao standing at the foot of the bed. Wet hair, mud-streaked legs, the same uniform she wore on the day of the school trip. She said nothing. Her face was pale. Her mouth opened slightly as if to speak, but no words came. Only tears, red like blood, fell from her eyes. Then she was gone. Rachani screamed. The family rushed in, lights turned on, doors thrown open, but no one else had seen her. No one else ever would. But the portrait was different again. This time Dao's smile was entirely gone. Her mouth was set, her brows furrowed. Her eyes unequivocally followed Rachani as she walked from one end of the room to the other. And when she turned her back, she felt them burn into her spine. The villagers started whispering. They said the house felt different. The dogs wouldn't come near it. Monks who passed by lowered their heads. The jasmine on the altar began to rot overnight. The milk offering soared within hours. Ants formed perfect circles around the base of the portrait. Someone,
An old monk from a neighboring village came by to offer advice. He said, "Sometimes the dead stay behind because they were called, not by accident, but by love." He did not stay for tea. And so on the 9th night, Ratchani stood before the altar once more. This time she spoke out loud. "Tao, my love, if you're still here, I'm listening, but I don't know how to help you." The candle flickered violently, and from deep inside the hallway, the sound of small feet running on wooden floors echoed once more. Pat-pat, pat-pat, pat-pat. Then laughter, and behind her, just above the candle flame, Tao's portrait glowed faintly. Her smile was gone, but now her lips were open, just enough to whisper back, "Don't leave me."
By the morning of the 10th day, the family had stopped lighting incense. No one said it aloud, but they had all begun to feel the same unease, that something wasn't right with the photograph on the wall. It no longer offered comfort, no longer felt like a tribute. Instead, it watched, it waited. And Tao no longer looked like Tao. Her mother sat on the floor beside the altar, staring up at the image. The smile was gone, not just faded by grief or poor lighting. It had disappeared, replaced by a slight downturn of the lips, a subtle narrowing of the eyes, as if the girl in the frame was not sleeping peacefully, but frowning, disappointed perhaps, or angry. Ratchani tilted her head one way, then the other. The effect was unmistakable. Wherever she moved, Tao's gaze followed. She reached forward with trembling fingers and touched the edge of the frame. It was ice cold. She jerked her hand back and knocked over the incense cup, scattering gray ashes across the mat. As she leaned to gather them, she heard it again. Pat, 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 pat. Quick little footsteps on the floorboards behind her. She turned around. The hallway was empty. Only the wind moved, pushing the curtain gently, like a child's breath. That afternoon, her nephew, little Chai, stood in the corner of the room, muttering to someone unseen. He was 5 years old, Tao's cousin. He held a toy car in one hand, a broken plastic elephant in the other. His mouth moved constantly, whispering, nodding, sometimes giggling. Ratchani crouched beside him. "Who are you talking to, Chai?" The boy didn't look at her. "Tao," he said simply. "She said not to tell you." Ratchani's blood went cold. "Tao? You remember her?" He shrugged, still not looking at her. "She said she's mad. She said you left her there." Her heart seized. "Left her where?" But Chai clamped his mouth shut and shook his head. She didn't press further, just pulled him close, holding him tightly against her chest. He smelled like dust and sweets and something else she couldn't name. Something wet, like riverbank mud. That night, the air in the house turned heavy again, suffocating. The wooden walls groaned like they were carrying too much grief. Ratchani sat in her room, staring at her hands. They wouldn't stop shaking. She hadn't eaten since morning. Outside, the cicadas screamed louder than usual, their cries rising and falling like a warning. The family had gone quiet, each retreating into their own rooms, pretending nothing was wrong. But they all knew. Precha, her husband, had refused to even look at the portrait that day. When she brought it up, he snapped, "It's a photo, that's all. Stop feeding it." Stop feeding it. She turned those words in her head again and again. But deep down, a terrible realization had already rooted itself. They were feeding it. Every glance, every whisper, every night spent staring at that frame, wondering what they had done wrong, every bit of grief was keeping Tao here. That night, the dreams came. Rachani stood in a schoolyard, empty, silent, a fog rolling in from all directions. She was barefoot, wearing her daughter's uniform, too tight for her frame. A bell rang in the distance, a soft metallic chime, and when she turned, she saw Tao, standing at the edge of a pond, wearing the same wet, mud-stained uniform. Her braids clung to her cheeks, her lips parted. "Why didn't you come?" Rachani tried to speak, but no words came. "I waited. I called you. I screamed." Tao lifted her hands, revealing her wrists, red with rope marks, cuts, bruises. "You didn't answer." The dream shifted. Now Rachani was underwater, cold, darkness all around, something pulling at her ankles. She couldn't breathe, and just before she lost consciousness, she saw the portrait, floating in the murky water, smiling again, but not kindly, mocking. She woke up screaming. Her nose was bleeding. She touched her upper lip and stared at the crimson on her fingers. The pillow beneath her head was stained red. Her husband stirred beside her, mumbling, then turned away. She rose and stumbled toward the altar room. The candle was already lit. No one had entered. And the portrait? Tao's mouth had changed again. It was slightly open now. Lips parted just a bit, as if caught mid-breath. Her head was tilted very slightly to the left. Rachani gasped. She rushed to the photo, touched the frame. It was warm, too warm, like something alive. The next day, she called her aunt. Buapan lived 2 villages away, in a small wooden shack near a disused shrine. She rarely answered her phone, but this time she did. Her voice, when it came through the speaker, was dry and flat. "You've seen it, haven't you?" Rachani didn't know what to say. Buapan continued. "I told you not to bury her so quickly." "What did you do, Auntie?" There was silence on the line. Then, "It wasn't supposed to go like this. I tried to help you. I tried to keep her close." "What do you mean? What did you do with the photo?" "Don't speak of it on the phone. I'll come tomorrow." Then the line went dead. That evening, Preacher returned home late, his face pale. He didn't speak during dinner. When Rachani pressed him, he finally muttered, "I saw her." He didn't need to say who. "Where?" "In the road, in front of the truck. I braked hard. But when I got out, there was nothing." He shook his head, sweat beading on his brow. "She looked at me like she hated me." Rachani reached for his hand. He pulled away. "It's your daughter. Do something." And he left the table. Later that night, Rachani returned to the altar. She brought fresh jasmine, a new candle, and a cup of warm milk, the kind thou used to beg for before bed. She knelt in front of the photo and stared into her daughter's eyes. The room was dark, save for the flicker of the flame. "Tao," she whispered, "I'm here. I'm not running. I promise I'll fix this. But please, tell me how." The flame wavered violently, then steadied. The milk cup tipped over on its own, spilling across the mat in a perfect circle. And from the hallway, again, the sound of bare feet, running, faster this time. Pat, 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 pat. No laughter, only the sudden sound of something slamming into the wall hard. A thud that shook the floorboards. Rachani rose and backed away slowly, the hairs on her arms standing on end. Then came the voice, small, trembling, right behind her. "Don't fix it. You'll leave me again." She turned. No one was there. But the portrait?
Dao was smiling again, only this time her teeth were visible, and they weren't her teeth. They were rotting, sharp, unnatural. Rachani collapsed to her knees, and the candle snuffed itself out.
The footsteps had become a part of the house. They came every night now, without fail, starting just past 2 in the morning. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes playful, other times angry, almost stomping, but always the same small, bare feet running from one end of the house to the other. At first, the family had tried to rationalize it. The house was old, wood shifted with temperature, rats in the ceiling, maybe a neighbor's child wandering too close. But by now, they all knew it was Dao, and she wasn't just walking anymore. She was looking, searching. On the 11th night, Rachani's mother-in-law, Mai Noi, was the first to fall ill. It started with a headache, then dizziness, then vomiting. Her hands trembled violently whenever she passed the altar room. And once, in the middle of breakfast, she stared blankly at Dao's photo and whispered, "Why is she upside down?" No one knew what she meant. Later that day, Mai Noi collapsed. She was rushed to the clinic, muttering incoherently, clawing at her own arms. The doctor found nothing wrong. No fever, no infection, just confusion, panic. But that night, as Rachani sat by her bedside, Mai Noi whispered something in the dark. "She's crawling on the ceiling." Rachani didn't dare look up. The same night, little Chai had a nightmare. He screamed until his throat bled. When his father finally woke him, the boy was soaked in sweat, eyes wide, pointing at the corner of the room. "She said I can't play anymore." "Who, Chai?" "Dao. She said I talk too much." They found scratch marks on the wooden floorboards beneath his bed. 3 long lines, perfectly parallel, as if made by fingernails. At dawn, Rachani returned to the altar. She didn't pray. She didn't offer milk. She sat and stared into the photo's eyes. Dao's expression had changed again. Now her head was tilted farther, almost unnaturally, her neck at an angle no living child could hold. And behind her, in the blurred background of the photo, Rachani saw something she had never noticed before. A shadow. Not just a blur, not an artifact of poor lighting, but the outline of a hand reaching toward Dao's shoulder. When Aunt Buapan finally arrived, she brought with her only 2 things, a bundle of red string and a small silver bowl wrapped in banana leaves. Her face was tight, tired. She stepped into the house and didn't greet anyone. She walked straight to the altar, dropped to her knees, and exhaled slowly. "You didn't tell me you used the photograph," Rachani said, trying to stay calm. Buapan didn't look at her. "I thought I could contain her." "You tied her spirit, didn't you?" Buapan nodded once. "It was the only photo we could use. Her body was gone. There was no time for proper rites. I thought if I bound her gently, she would stay peacefully. I just needed more time to finish it." "But she's not peaceful," Rachani whispered. Buapan finally looked up at the portrait. Her lips parted. "Oh no, she's awake." The family gathered in the main room. Rachani sat close to Buapan, who began unraveling the red string.
The old shamans, we used to bind spirits with objects, not to trap them, but to protect them. Sometimes it was a doll, a comb, a lock of hair. But the photograph, that's the most dangerous, because it sees, because people look back at it. "What happens if the binding isn't finished?" Preacher asked, voice hoarse. "The soul gets stuck in between. They don't know if they're dead or alive. And every time someone mourns them, every tear, every thought, feeds them." "She's feeding off of us," Rachini whispered. "Yes, but worse, she is confused, and confusion becomes anger." Buopan dipped her fingers into the silver bowl, lifting out a thick black paste. "We must finish the rite before she fully returns." "Returns?" Preacher said sharply. "She's dead." Buopan didn't respond. She stood slowly, walking toward the altar, and placed the red string around the frame. The moment it touched the wood, the candle flared, the incense stick cracked in two, and Tao's portrait, just for a second, blinked. That night, the house trembled. The footsteps came again, louder, running faster, up and down the stairs, across the attic floor, scratching at the walls. Pat, 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 pat. A banging sound echoed from inside the wardrobe. Doors creaked, dishes shattered. Chai screamed again in his sleep. Mainoi mumbled chants from her childhood. Rachini sat alone at the altar, clutching the frame. "Tao, please stop. I'm here. I didn't leave you. I never wanted to leave you." She heard it again, a child's voice, soft as wind. "You cried too late." And then came the worst sound yet, knocking from inside the ceiling. 3 slow, deliberate knocks right above her head. Then silence. At dawn, they found the portrait face down on the floor. No one had touched it. The string had snapped cleanly in 3 places. And across the back of the frame, written in smudged charcoal, were 4 words. "I don't forgive you." Rachini collapsed, not from fear, but from guilt. For she remembered now what she hadn't told anyone. The night of Tao's cremation, the monks had advised her to stay, to chant, to walk 3 times around the stupa, to call her daughter's name. But she couldn't. She had fled the sight of the flames, fled the smell, fled the unbearable truth that her daughter's body was turning to ash. She had left early, and Tao had waited, alone. That evening, Buopan took Rachini aside. She said, "There's still a way." "To release her?" Buopan shook her head. "To finish what I started." "What does that mean?" "She needs to come through you one last time, to understand, to be told, to be let go." "You want me to let her possess me?" Buopan nodded. "Not for long, just enough to finish the chant. The ritual must be completed from within, or she will remain here and begin to turn into something else." "Something else?" Buopan whispered. "A pea-pop, a devouring spirit." Rachini felt her knees go weak. The girl in the photo, her child, was slipping further away with each night. And if they did nothing, she would return not as a daughter, but as something hungry. That night, Rachini lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She could feel Dao's presence above her, crawling, waiting. The footsteps never stopped now, only slowed when Rachini spoke. "Tomorrow you can come home, I promise." The air chilled instantly, and from the altar room, without warning, the sound of a photograph falling.
It was supposed to be a simple day. A school outing to the old temple by the river, Wat Nung Sawan. A short bus ride, a picnic lunch, a few candles lit in reverence to the Buddha. A tradition, the teachers said, meant to teach gratitude and reflection. No one thought it would end in fire and ashes. The morning began with excitement. Dao was the first to arrive at school, her braids bouncing as she ran across the courtyard in her white and blue uniform. She held her lunchbox proudly. Her mother had packed grilled pork and sticky rice, her favorite. In her pocket was a small charm, shaped like a golden bell, a gift from her aunt Buapan. She shook it as she walked, smiling at the cheerful jingle it made. "Don't lose it," Buapan had said. "It protects you when you cross water." Dao didn't know what that meant, but she kept it close anyway. The class boarded the bus at 8:15 a.m., just after morning prayers. There were 22 students, 3 teachers, and a driver named Uncle Goran, who liked to whistle old look songs through his teeth. The children giggled. The bus smelled like floor wax and roasted bananas. It was the kind of morning that made you forget anything could go wrong. But someone was already watching. The temple sat beside a wide bend in the river, its weathered chetties leaning like they'd grown tired over time. The monks were kind, quiet. The air was still and hot, the sky bright but hazy. The river shimmered like glass. The students were led to the main hall, where they lit incense and placed lotus flowers at the feet of a faded Buddha statue. Some children grew restless, but Dao knelt perfectly still, hands pressed in a Y. She whispered something under her breath, a wish, perhaps. Then came the offering ceremony. Then the picnic. Then the water. There was a shallow dock at the back of the temple. It stretched out over the muddy river, just wide enough for 2 children to walk side by side. The teachers had warned them not to go near it. But children wander. Dao wandered. She had followed a white butterfly to the edge of the dock, laughing, chasing it with outstretched hands. She wasn't alone. Another girl had followed her, calling out, "Come back, teacher will scold us." Then Dao slipped. The dock creaked, the butterfly flew away, and in one terrible moment, she was gone. No splash, no scream, only silence. And the golden bell floating in a circle on the surface. They searched for hours. Monks, teachers, even villagers joined in. They dragged the muddy river with nets, with hooks, prayed, cried, lit candles that flickered even in the heat. Her body surfaced at dusk. It wasn't bloated, wasn't distorted. It was perfect, as if she had merely fallen asleep under the water. Her hands were still folded, her eyes gently closed, and most disturbingly, she was smiling. The body was brought to shore. The teachers were silent. The head monk muttered under his breath, making strange signs with his fingers. One whispered to another, "The water didn't take her. Something else did." Her lunchbox was recovered, unopened, but her charm, gone. The village clinic declared it an accidental drowning.
Rachini collapsed at the sight of her daughter's body. She clung to Dao's damp clothing, to her pale hands, sobbing until her voice gave out. She begged for more time, just one more hour, just one more minute. But the monks urged her. We must burn her quickly. The spirit is fresh. If we delay, she may linger. And so, within 48 hours, the body was cremated. Too fast, too sudden. No proper rites. No farewell. No final touch. And when the smoke rose from the crematorium chimney, it carried with it not peace, but something unfinished. What no one noticed, what no one asked, was who took the photo. The portrait that appeared the next day, already printed and framed, resting quietly at the base of the altar. Rachini had not chosen it, nor had the teachers. The photographer had not been called, and yet there it was, Dao in her uniform, sitting, eyes closed, hands folded, smiling, but not in life. It was a photo of her body, cleaned, prepared, posed, taken after death. Buapan had brought it, and said nothing. She told herself it was love. She told herself it was protection. Dao had died in water, unblessed water, no final chant, no guardian spell. Her soul could wander, be lost, fall prey to river spirits or forest ghosts. So Buapan did what she had once sworn never to do again. She whispered an old rite over the photo, tied her niece's soul to the image just until a proper ritual could be performed. Just until the full moon. Just until the family was ready. But she was too late. The spirit had already begun to open its eyes. Back in the present, Buapan finished telling Rachini the truth. They sat beneath the altar. The air was thick with incense and heat. I didn't want to trap her, she said softly, but I didn't want her lost either. So many go missing, so many children. They don't find their way back. Their voices get swallowed, so I gave her a voice. Rachini was crying silently. She's not angry because she died, Buapan continued. She's angry because she remembers everything and no one called her home. What do we do now? Rachini asked. Buapan placed her hand on the floor, palm flat. We bring her back and we finish what I started, but she will need a body. She needs to speak. Mine, she whispered. It's the only way. Buapan nodded. That night, Dao came to Rachini in a dream again. But this time, she wasn't standing by the river. She was inside the house, in the altar room, holding her own funeral portrait in her arms, like a doll. She looked up at her mother. Her eyes were hollow, endless. Her voice soft. You burned my body. I had to, but not my soul. She raised the frame. Her image in the photo blinked. Now you carry me.
Buapan waited until the house was quiet. The wind had died down. The candles had been snuffed. Even the footsteps, ever present in recent nights, seemed to pause, as if the spirit itself was listening. She sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, her hands trembling as she poured warm tea into a chipped ceramic cup. The smell of lemongrass and ash lingered in the air. Rachini sat across from her, eyes wide, heart braced for something she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. And Buapan began. There are things our grandmothers did in secret, she said softly.
things done out of love and out of fear. She touched the rim of her cup, eyes distant. When I was a girl, I trained under a Mo Ying named Sao Lek, a spirit medium from a mountain village. She taught me how to speak to the ones who wander, the ones who don't know they've died. You were powerful, Rachani said. You helped so many. People still talk about you. Wapan gave a small, bitter smile. That power cost me everything. She looked up. And I used it again for Tao. Rachani said nothing. She didn't move. She didn't blink. Only her breath betrayed her. The moment I saw Tao's body, I knew her spirit wouldn't rest. The way she was found, smiling in the water like she had accepted something. That's not how a child dies, not naturally. You said she needed protection, Rachani whispered. Yes, but not just from the outside world, from herself. Wapan reached into her cloth bag and pulled out an old scroll wrapped in faded red string. She unrolled it carefully, revealing a page darkened with age, symbols written in black ink like veins across parchment. This is the binding rite of the Pa Pror, the portrait tether. Rachani recoiled slightly. I've heard of that. That's forbidden. Yes. Dangerous. Yes. Then why? Wapan's voice cracked. Because I couldn't bear the thought of her being lost in the dark, so I anchored her. She held up her fingers. 3 steps. First, photograph the body. Second, prepare the ink with oil from the funeral pyre. Third, speak the name into the picture at midnight. You did all that? Wapan shook her head. I was interrupted. The cremation fire burned too quickly. I had no ashes, and I didn't have time to speak her name into the final breath of night. You left the ritual incomplete. Yes. She looked up, eyes now glistening. And now she's not tethered, she's trapped. Rachani stared at the scroll. What happens to a trapped spirit? Wapan closed the scroll. They begin to forget who they were. They become their pain. They feed on memory, grief, attention. That's why the photo keeps changing. Every time you look at it, you're giving her energy, and she's evolving. Into what? Wapan didn't answer. She didn't have to. The answer was already walking the hallways of their home. That night, Wapan insisted on sleeping near the altar. She placed charms beneath her pillow, copper amulets, dried leaves folded in protective symbols, and a tiny bell like the one Tao once wore. At 2:06 a.m., she awoke to the sound of breathing, not her own, not Rachani's, but heavy, shallow, right beside her ear. She turned slowly and saw nothing. But the portrait? The eyes were wide now, startled, alert, watching. And this time the mouth was open, too wide, unnaturally wide, like a scream caught in silence. In the morning, the photograph had changed again. Rachani stared at it, horrified. Tao's face had begun to blur. Her skin, once smooth, now had darkened patches, mold-like. Her braids hung limp as though wet. Her uniform appeared darker, heavy with invisible water. And behind her, where once was shadow, now stood a vague figure, tall, faceless, hands resting on her shoulders. Wapan paced in front of the altar, muttering under her breath. She's calling something to her, a gatekeeper, a collector. If we wait too long, she won't be the one haunting this house. Then what do we do? Rachani asked. Finish the ritual. Wapan turned to face her. We must prepare the body. Rachani froze. What body? Yours. That afternoon, Boapan began preparing the ritual space. She cleaned the altar with salt water and lime. She laid right robes across the floorboards. She drew sacred markings in chalk around the photo, each one closing a spiritual path, binding it tightly to the room. Tonight, when the moon is highest, we will offer your body as a vessel. Tao must come through you. She must finish the words I failed to speak. Only then will she understand her death. Only then will she be able to choose to let go. And if she doesn't choose, Boapan was silent. Then she will break free of the photo. And possess me forever? No, something worse. As the sun set, the house darkened unnaturally early. Clouds gathered thick and gray. Thunder rolled without lightning. The trees swayed though the wind was still. And the laughter returned, not playful, but low, distorted, as if someone was trying to remember what laughter felt like. Chai cried in his sleep. Preacha locked himself in the shed. Mei Ni began to chant verses no one had taught her, her voice hoarse, her hands tracing invisible symbols in the air. And in the center of the home, by the altar, Rachani knelt in silence, waiting. Just before midnight, Boapan brought her the photograph. The image was now barely visible. Dao's face twisted, her smile decayed, her eyes pitch-black voids. Rachani took it into her hands and held it to her chest and whispered, "Come, my child, I'm here." A wind slammed through the house, all candles extinguished, and in the darkness, Rachani felt her daughter step into her.
The house did not sleep that night. It watched, it waited. And in the center of it, Rachani knelt before the altar, her hands trembling around the photograph, her body growing colder with every breath. The world around her had gone silent. The crickets had stopped singing. Even the wind had abandoned the trees. Only the frame in her hands remained warm, too warm, like something living, like something breathing. Boapan whispered the chant beside her, voice thin and quick, drawing symbols in the air with her fingers. Her eyes flicked constantly between the portrait and Rachani's face, watching for the moment Tao would come through. Rachani whispered her daughter's name, not once, but 3 times, her voice cracking with each call. "Tao, come home. Tao, come into me. Tao, let me hold you." And then it began. A sound filled the air, sharp and unnatural. Laughter. High-pitched, but warped, stretched, as if heard through broken speakers or underwater speakers from the next world. The portrait in Rachani's hands vibrated, not violently, just enough for her to feel it move. And Dao's smile, once gone, once replaced by a scream, returned. But this smile was wrong, too wide, too knowing. It reached her ears. It stretched her skin. It was the smile of something that no longer remembered what innocence looked like. And from that smile, the laughter spilled out. Rachani gasped and dropped the photo. It hit the floor with a crack, but didn't break. Instead, it began to laugh, louder, mocking, like a child playing hide-and-seek in the dark, knowing you'd never find them. Boapan stepped back, chanting louder now, trying to contain it, but the photo rolled toward the altar on its own, and flames erupted from the candle beside it, straight up, 2 feet into the air, blue at the center, hissing. The red string that once circled the frame burst into flames, and yet the photo itself remained intact, not even scorched. It thrived in the fire. It laughed harder.
Rachani clutched her chest, crying now. "Dao, please, you're scaring me. This isn't you." But a voice answered, not aloud, but in her mind. Dao's voice, but not the Dao she remembered. "You didn't come to the river. You left me in the smoke. Now I live in fire." Rachani shook her head, sobbing, "No, no, I never meant." "You let them burn me." The laughter stopped. Suddenly, the fire died. And in that silence, the photograph spoke. It didn't use words. It groaned. A long, slow groan, like wood warping under weight, or a child crying through clenched teeth. And the sound came from the glass. Bopon stepped forward and placed a protective charm on the frame. The sound stopped, the air shifted, and Dao's image within the photograph smiled again. But this time, her eyes bled. Later, when dawn broke and light returned, Bopon examined the frame. The glass was cracked, but only from the inside. A thin spiderweb pattern stretched across Dao's chest in the photo. Her eyes were faded, her skin pale, but the blood-like smear around her mouth was fresh, wet to the touch. Bopon wiped it away with a cloth. It hissed. The cloth turned black. Rachani sat in silence, wrapped in a blanket. She had no tears left, only emptiness. She felt Dao inside her, flickering like a dying candle. Not quite a voice, not quite a memory, but a sensation, a presence. She remembered the first time Dao laughed, truly laughed, during a thunderstorm as a toddler. The sky had cracked in two, and everyone screamed, but little Dao had giggled and clapped, clinging to her mother's neck. "Sky is talking, Mama!" Now the sky was silent, and only the portrait laughed. The villagers noticed the change. Dogs began howling in the night. Fruit offerings turned rotten overnight, even sealed in containers. A monk passing by the home on morning alms stopped at the gate and refused to enter. He held his prayer beads tightly, whispering something as he stared at the roof. "There is someone on top of your house," he said softly. "A girl in uniform. But she's not looking at me. She's looking straight down." No one else could see her, but everyone felt her. Mainoi, the grandmother, began to deteriorate. She mumbled to herself in corners, drawing lines on the floor with chalk, even when no chalk was in her hand. Once, Preacher caught her rocking back and forth in front of the TV, which wasn't turned on, whispering, "She's in the wires now. She's inside the lights." They had to remove every mirror from the house, because each one reflected something different. In one, Dao's braid hung on the wrong shoulder. In another, her eyes blinked even when no one moved. And once, in the smallest mirror, a pocket-sized one Rachani forgot in her drawer, she saw Dao's face pressed against the glass, mouth open wide as if screaming to be let out. They tried to burn the photo again, in the backyard, with kerosene, dry coconut husks, and sacred ash from the temple. They placed the frame in the center, lit the fire, and watched as the flames swallowed it. But the moment the smoke rose, they heard giggling from behind them, and when they turned, the photo was no longer in the fire. It was back, propped up against the altar, clean, untouched. Dao was smiling again, only now her smile had teeth. Bopon closed the doors and locked them. "We don't try to destroy it again. If we provoke her further, she won't stay in the photo. She'll come out." "She's already has," Rachani whispered, and Bopon nodded. "Yes, but she hasn't finished coming through, not fully. She's still half-bound, which means there's still time. Time for what? Time to help her remember who she was, not what she's becoming. And if we can't? Bhupan didn't answer first. Then, quietly, then the portrait won't laugh anymore, because she won't need it. That night, Rachani dreamed again. She stood inside a photo studio. The walls were gray, the floor was concrete. Dao sat on a wooden stool in the center, her hands folded, her head tilted slightly. She wore her uniform. She smiled, but she was rotting. Her teeth were cracked, her eyes bloodshot, her fingers blackened at the tips. And behind her, the photographer stepped forward, a man with no face. He adjusted the lighting, lifted the camera, and whispered, "Say goodbye." The flash went off, and Rachani awoke with a scream caught in her throat and blood trickling from her ears.
The house no longer breathed. It pulsed. It groaned at night like it had bones. The floorboards swelled with dampness. The air smelled like wet cloth and smoke that refused to clear. And inside the walls, something moved. It wasn't Tao. It was what Tao was becoming. Bhupan knew the signs. She had seen it once before, long ago, in a different village, where a child's soul had been tethered too tightly, too long. That spirit had turned on its own mother, speaking in tongues, scratching prayers into the floor with broken fingernails. The house had been abandoned. The family disappeared. Only the altar remained, charred black and still whispering. Bhupan had sworn never to perform the pop roar again, and yet, here she was. The preparations had to be precise. She cleared the center of the altar room, sweeping the floor with salt and lemongrass branches. She burned the husk of a coconut, mixed the ash with black sesame and fish sauce, a binding mixture known to confuse wandering spirits, used only in emergencies. Around the altar, she laid down 7 folded banana leaves, each containing a different item. A baby tooth, a strand of Tao's hair taken from the comb, a coin from the funeral offering, a piece of scorched wood from the cremation site, a child's sandal, a mirror wrapped in red silk, and lastly, a small bell identical to the one Tao had worn the day she died. These were her anchors, her last chance to tie Tao to something other than pain. Rachani knelt nearby, pale and still. She hadn't spoken since the fire, since the portrait laughed, since the blood ran from her ears and the mirrors began showing things they shouldn't. Something inside her had changed. Bhupan could feel it. Tao had already begun to nest. "She's not herself anymore," Rachani whispered. "That's because you're feeding her with guilt, and she's feeding on it." "Then what am I supposed to do?" "You remember who she was, and you remind her over and over until she hears you again." "And if she doesn't listen?" Bhupan looked at the photo. Tao's image was barely visible now, her face fading behind a growing shadow. Her eyes had turned pure black like twin wells. Her smile was thin, glass-like. A crack ran down the left side of her face in the image. Not the frame. The photograph itself was fracturing from the inside. Bhupan inhaled deeply. "Then we trap her." They waited until the moon was high. The candles were lit, 7 flames dancing like watchers in the corners. Bhupan began the chant,
her voice hoarse, dragging syllables from her throat like they weighed pounds. Each word was an offering, each breath a plea. Rachani placed the photograph in the center of the circle of banana leaves, and the room shifted. The light dimmed, though no flame went out. A pressure fell over them, thick and damp, like being underwater. The shadows along the walls stretched longer. And then the bell rang. But not the one Buapan had placed. It came from above, from the ceiling, tiny and distant, then closer, then inside the room. Jing jing, jing jing. A child's giggle followed, and from the photo, a whisper. I remember. Rachani gasped. Dao's face in the portrait shimmered. For just a moment, it was her again, smiling softly, eyes bright, no blood, no shadow. That's my baby, Rachani cried. Don't break the circle, Buapan snapped. Rachani froze, hands trembling. The image darkened again. Dao blinked, slowly, and then her eyes moved. Not just followed, they shifted position inside the photograph. A blur, a jerk. They slid from center to left, watching the banana leaf with the sandal, then to the right, toward the coin, then downward, directly at Rachani. Mama, why didn't you carry me? Rachani's voice cracked. I couldn't. I wasn't strong enough. You left me with strangers. I was afraid. I didn't know how to say goodbye. So you didn't. Dao's voice turned sharp. The photograph began to smoke, not from fire, from within. The image bled ash across the glass. The photo paper curled. Buapan chanted louder, sprinkling the ash mixture in a circle. She poured fish sauce into the center. The flames hissed. Dao's laughter returned, but it was weaker now, like something tired or crying. Suddenly, the mirror wrapped in red silk shattered, though no one touched it. A wind howled through the house. The banana leaves caught flame. And then, silence. Complete, unnatural silence. Rachani leaned in. Dao's image was still, peaceful, unmoving. Did it work? She whispered. I don't know. She looks like herself again. That's not always a good sign. Buapan reached for the photograph, but the moment her fingers touched the frame, the glass cracked, straight across the center, and from within, a voice whispered, That wasn't me. The room went black, every candle extinguished at once. The photo dropped to the floor, face up. Dao's eyes in the image began to glow, a faint, pulsing red, and a second face appeared behind hers, faint, skull-like, looming, watching. Buapan screamed and threw salt over the photo. The red glow stopped. The image flickered, static-like. Dao's face rippled like water disturbed. And in the silence that followed, Rachani heard her daughter's voice again, different this time, small, weak, almost scared. Mama, there's something behind me.
It began with a storm. Not rain, not thunder, but a pressure in the air, like something old had been disturbed. A storm of the spirit world. Trees outside the house swayed without wind. Cracks appeared along the walls like veins under skin. The house groaned as if it resented its own foundations. And above it all, from the dark attic, came the sound of tiny bare feet running in circles, faster and faster, until suddenly nothing. Silence. Then the bell. Jing jing, jing jing. Rachani stood barefoot in the altar room,
candlelight flickering across her face. Her hair clung to her cheeks, her lips trembled as she held the portrait against her chest. She could feel Tao, not just in the house, but inside her bones. Every breath she took felt borrowed. Her hands were no longer steady, her thoughts no longer entirely her own. And her heartbeat? It had begun to sync with another rhythm, a lighter one, like a child's. Buapan circled her slowly, chanting in a low voice, the same chant her grandmother had once used to welcome a spirit into her own flesh. It was not possession in the Western sense, not a taking over. It was permission, a body offered as a vessel, out of love, out of desperation, and now out of time. If she steps fully into you, Buakan said, you must speak as her. Let her speak, let her remember. If she forgets who she was, she will not leave. What happens then? Buapan's eyes darkened. You'll never come back. Rachani nodded. She lowered herself to the floor, crossed her legs, closed her eyes, and whispered the name she had spoken since the day her daughter was born. Tao. The candle flames dropped low, the air turned bitter, and from the ceiling, a crack, loud, splintering. A board above snapped, then another, until dust began to fall like ash from the rafters. The photograph in Rachani's lap grew hot, and then the laughter returned, but only briefly. It dissolved into weeping, high-pitched, desperate, coming from within her chest. Her eyes snapped open, and they were not hers. Tao had entered. At first she didn't speak. Her body twitched, fingers curling, jaw clenching. Then came a whisper, small, childlike, but spoken through her mother's lips. I can't find my shoes? Buapan steadied her own breath. Where are you, Tao? It's wet here. I stepped in the river. My feet are cold. You're safe now. You're with Mama. Rachani's head tilted. A tear slipped from her left eye. I didn't want to go in. They pushed me. Who pushed you? I don't know their names. They said it was just a game. The candle flickered violently. Did you drown, Tao? A pause, then something grabbed me, but not with hands. What then? Its face was the water. Rachani's voice cracked. Mama, where are you? Buapan stepped closer. She's right here, child. You're inside her. It's dark here. Can you see the altar? I see fire, but it's not burning. It's spinning. Tao, listen to me. You're not dead anymore. You're not lost. You're here. You can choose. Choose what? To stay? Buapan held her breath. Or to go? Tao's head tilted again. I want to stay. I like it here. It's warm in Mama. Rachani flinched. But there's someone else in the photo now. She says she can stay if I leave. Don't listen to her, Buapan warned. That's the other. That's not part of you. But she sings when I sleep. She's not your friend. She says I'll forget everything soon. Then you must leave before that happens. Tao's voice grew slower. But what if I forget Mama? Buapan's voice cracked. You won't. If you go now, you'll remember her forever. Tao was quiet. Rachani's body sagged forward, her breathing heavier. Her fingers twitched, then stilled. And then Tao spoke one last time. Okay, but will you hold me one last time? Rachani's arms wrapped herself tightly. Her head bowed, her breath hitched, and then she fell forward, unconscious. Buapan caught her. The candles blew out. The room fell silent, and the portrait, which had been burning from within, suddenly turned cold. The image faded. Dao's face softened. Her eyes closed, and for the first time in days, her smile was peaceful. Rachani awoke later hours, cradled by Buapan. The sun had not yet risen. Her body ached. Her lips were cracked, but she felt lighter, empty in a way that hurt and healed. "Is she gone?" she whispered. Buapan nodded slowly. She let go. Where did she go? Where children go when they're loved enough to leave. Rachani cried softly, and outside the window, the wind shifted, soft, almost like a sigh. Later that morning, the portrait turned black, not with ink, not with ash, but like a photograph left too long in sunlight, faded, burned out from the inside. The frame remained, but the image was gone. Only the faintest outline of a braid remained, like smoke caught in glass. Buapan wrapped it in cloth and placed it in a sealed jar, buried beneath the tamarind tree behind the house. She marked the soil with salt and string. "We will never open this again," she said. "What if she comes back?" Rachani asked. "She won't, unless we call her. And if someone else does?" Buapan looked toward the altar. "Then we pray they know how to let her go." That night, Rachani dreamed again, but this time Dao was laughing. Not from behind glass, not from inside fire, but in a field of green, running barefoot, her bell jingling softly as she disappeared into the sun.
The house was quiet now. Too quiet. No footsteps at night. No bells ringing in the attic. No laughter echoing from behind the walls. Just silence. Rachani sat in the altar room long after the candles had gone out. Her hands were folded, but not in prayer. She wasn't sure what to pray for anymore. Dao was gone, but the grief remained. Grief doesn't vanish with a spirit. It lingers like smoke in fabric, faint, stubborn, and impossible to wash out. The photograph had turned black the morning after the ritual. Not scorched, not erased, but drained. Its glossy surface no longer reflected light. It was now a void, cold to the touch. Buapan had buried it beneath the tamarind tree, binding it with salt and string, whispering old protective chants. But Rachani couldn't shake the feeling that something had been left undone. A voice in the back of her mind, not Dao's, kept whispering, "You didn't finish it." 3 nights after the possession, a strange smell returned to the house. It wasn't death, it wasn't rot, it was ink. Old ink, iron ink, the kind once made with ash, rice wine, and blood. Rachani followed the scent to the altar. There, on the floorboards, written in neat, wet strokes, was a single word. Young. In Thai, it meant, not yet. She called for Buapan. The old shaman arrived before sundown, carrying a cloth bag filled with tools Rachani had never seen before. Bone needles, copper rings, charmed ink bottles sealed with wax. "The ritual we performed," Buapan said grimly, "was enough to loosen her. But not to release her?" Buapan shook her head. "She chose to go, but the doorway we opened is still ajar." "You said she was free." "Dao is. Then what's left?" Buapan knelt before the altar, eyes closed.
She inhaled once, twice. Her face twisted. Something else came through. It had happened during the possession, subtly. In the moment Da was leaving, something else had pressed against the veil. A presence without a name, not a spirit of a person, not a child, but something born from grief, fed by fear, bound to the ink, to the photograph, to the ritual's unfinished breath. "This thing," Buapan said, "has no face, no voice of its own. It wears the shape of others. It imitates until you believe it's real." And now it's here. It's already chosen a home. Rachani's blood turned to ice. "Where?" Buapan looked up and pointed to her. The signs returned. Nosebleeds, hallucinations, the sensation of drowning, even in dry air. Once she woke in the middle of the night and found muddy footprints by her bed, too large to be Dao's, not adult-sized, not human-sized. Another night, she caught her reflection smiling when her face was still. And always just before sleep, the faint sound of scratching, not at the doors, but inside the walls. Buapan returned with ink, not ordinary ink, but sacred namdam, black ink infused with tree resin, ghost pepper oil, and drops of her own blood, prepared under the last full moon. "This ink binds what cannot be buried," she explained, "but it demands something in return." "What?" "Truth." "Whose truth?" "Yours." The ritual began in silence. Rachani removed her blouse and sat at the center of the altar room, her back bare, her hair pinned up. Buapan dipped the bone needle into the ink and began to draw. Not symbols, not prayers, memories, lines that told stories. Each stroke was a moment Rachani had buried, the day she ignored Dao's call for help while cooking, the time she snapped at her for crying too long, the look she gave her husband when he said, "She's just being dramatic." Each line hurt, not because of the needle, but because of the guilt. This was the offering: blood and ink, memory and pain. By the time Buapan finished, the sun had risen. Rachani's back was covered in symbols, a mural of truth. At the center, between her shoulder blades, a small image had been carved. A girl walking away from a burning house. Her hands were empty. Her shadow, too long for her body, reached out behind her like claws. "You're sealed now," Buakan said. "But if you lie again, if you try to hide what happened, she'll find you." "Dao?" "No." Buapan packed the ink. "The one that isn't Dao." That evening, Rachani lit a single candle before the altar. She spoke to no one, but the house listened. And from somewhere behind the walls, something chuckled. Not Dao's laughter. Lower, older. A sound that didn't belong in a child's throat. That night she dreamed again. This time she stood inside the portrait, inside the photo. Everything around her was gray. Two figures stood before her. One was Dao, small, smiling, radiant, fading like morning mist. The other was made of shadow. It had Dao's face, Dao's eyes, but none of her warmth. It held a camera and whispered, "Your grief is my ink." The flash went off, and Rachani awoke screaming. On her pillow, in the faint light of morning, was a smudge of fresh black ink.
The house had begun to breathe, not metaphorically, not with grief or memory, but literally. The walls swelled with invisible lungs, expanding with each nightfall, contracting before sunrise. The windows fogged from the inside, as if exhaling some unseen mist. The wooden floor pulsed faintly beneath bare feet, like the beat of a weak but persistent heart. And the sounds? No longer footsteps. Now they were sighs, deep, tired, wet. The kind of sighs made by something ancient and newly born. Rachani stood barefoot in the hallway, watching the door to the altar room pulse ever so slightly in its frame. It moved, not from wind nor hinge, but from pressure behind it. She hadn't entered the altar room in 2 days, not since the ink ritual, not since the dreams, not since her reflection whispered back. She avoided mirrors now. Even her own shadow felt wrong. Buapan refused to spend the night in the house anymore. She came only in daylight, carrying incense, blessed salt, and woven charms that no longer seemed to hold their power. "It's not just her anymore," she told Rachani, fingers shaking as she traced protection symbols on the windowsills. "This place, it's changing, becoming something else." "Like what?" "Like her." "Dao?" Buapan didn't answer. Instead, she whispered, "This house is becoming the portrait." At first, Rachani thought it was a metaphor, but then she noticed the hallway was shorter, the rooms narrower. Windows now opened into walls. One night, the front door refused to open at all, though there was no lock on it. And when she pressed her ear to the floor, she heard breathing. Not hers, not Dao's, but something deep below the foundation. Something learning how to exist. May Noi, Rachani's mother-in-law, had been locked in her bedroom for days. She no longer responded to her name. When they knocked, she only whispered, "The wood has eyes now. She's watching." They found her scratching numbers into the wall with her fingernails. 3 digits repeated over and over, 999. Upside down, it read 666. Chai, the little boy, pointed to the ceiling one morning and said, "Uncle is living in the beams." "What uncle?" Rachani asked. "The one that's borrowing Dao's voice." "What does he say?" "He says he wants to take your face." Chai then laughed, clapped twice, and walked away like it was nothing. The next night the walls sweated, not with humidity, but with ink. Black trails dripped from the ceiling beams, running down the corners, pooling beneath the altar door. When Rachani touched it, her fingers tingled, not from heat, but from memory. She saw flashes, Dao's eyes wide with fear, a hand not hers holding her underwater, the face behind the camera, and a whisper, "If the house remembers, you won't be allowed to forget." Buapan returned the following morning and brought with her a visiting monk, a man who had studied both scripture and shadow, whose eyes had seen more than they should. He stepped into the home and stopped, mid-step. "This is no longer a house," he murmured. "It's an echo." "Of what?" asked Rachani. "Of everything that was left unsaid." He stood in the altar room for 3 minutes, then turned to Rachani and said, "There's a door beneath the house. It's opening." That evening, Rachani stood in the kitchen and heard someone humming in the walls. It was Dao's lullaby, but slower, off-key, decomposed.
She followed the sound to the crawl space beneath the stairs, a place she hadn't touched in years. As she opened the small wooden door, a wave of warm air hit her face. It smelled like river water and burnt jasmine. Inside, she found a staircase, wooden, ancient, descending into dirt. "That was never there," she whispered. "It was waiting," said a voice behind her. She turned. No one was there, but on the wall, Dao's handprint. Wet, fresh, too large. That night, Rachani locked herself in her bedroom, but the walls breathed around her. The floor rose beneath her feet, and in the corner of the room, the air shifted, thickened, and whispered, "You didn't finish the story." She closed her eyes. "You closed the door too early." She covered her ears. "I'm not in the photo anymore." She screamed. And in that scream, one loud, aching cry, the house exhaled. A sharp gust of wind blew every candle out. The floor cracked. The mirror in the hallway shattered. And somewhere beneath the altar, something knocked. In the morning, the rooms were quiet again, but the hallway was longer. Too long. Impossible. She walked from her bedroom to the kitchen and counted the steps. 29. It had always been 13. And on the walls, now warped and sweating, new photographs had appeared. Old family photos, but each one was slightly changed. Dao was present in all of them, even ones she had never been part of. And in each image, she was smiling, but never looking at the camera, always staring at Rachani. She took one photo off the wall and turned it over. Written on the back in smudged ink, "You live here now, just like me." The monk returned the next day, but he never crossed the threshold. He stood at the edge of the yard, bowed once, and said, "There is no altar anymore, only an eye pretending to be one." "Can you help us?" Rachani asked. "This place doesn't want help." "What does it want?" The monk looked to the sky, then back at her. "It wants to be remembered, and it wants you to pay the price for forgetting." That night, Rachani sat in the altar room again. The walls swelled and creaked like lungs. The floor beneath her pulsed, and in front of her, a new photograph appeared. One she had never taken, one that had never existed. It was her, sitting in the altar room, staring into the camera. But behind her, barely visible in the frame, Dao, smiling, holding her mother's shadow in her hands.
They tried to burn the portrait again. It was Wapan's idea, not out of panic, but out of grim resolve. "The door has opened," she said, her voice stripped of all ceremony. "Whatever crawled through is not Dao. It wears her, but it does not remember love. It remembers only hunger." The monk had left. The protective chants had faded. And now the house was no longer a house. It was an altar to grief. An unfinished ritual looped in endless silence. And the portrait, once blackened, once buried, had returned. It sat neatly on the altar again, unscorched, whole. Dao's image had reappeared, but not as a child, not anymore. Rachani didn't recognize the girl in the frame. She wore a school uniform, yes. She had Dao's soft jawline, her dark eyes, but she was older, taller, maybe 16, maybe 17. Her mouth was no longer smiling. It was slightly open, as if whispering something under her breath. And her eyes, Her eyes were watching you, even when you closed your own. They took the portrait outside before sunset. The air was dry, the wind still. Pritcha dug a shallow fire pit behind the house, hands shaking, shirt soaked in sweat. He hadn't spoken in hours, since the hallway stretched, since he woke to find all his clothes soaked in river water. This ends tonight. I'm not living in a coffin. They lined the pit with dry banana leaves, coconut husks, and oil-soaked cloth, then laid the portrait gently in the center. It didn't resist, it didn't move, it simply waited. Buapan lit the match. She whispered one last prayer, not to expel, but to release. If there is anything left of the girl we loved, may she go where light cannot burn and darkness cannot follow. She dropped the flame. The fire ignited with a roar. The heat surged upward. Smoke curled into the sky, and for a moment, just a moment, it looked like it was working. Then the laughing began. Not from the portrait, but from under the ground. A high, playful laugh, the kind that came from a child being tickled. It rose from the soil beneath the fire, dancing through the flames. And then the smoke changed. It didn't rise. It spun. A spiral, tight, controlled, like it was being pulled down, not up. The fire began to hiss. And the portrait? It didn't burn, not even blister. The frame remained intact, the image unchanged. But the fire cooled. Before their eyes, it dimmed. Orange turned to blue, blue to gray, and then ice. A layer of frost formed on the tips of the flames. Then it all went out. Silence, smoke, ash, and in the center of the pit, the portrait, completely untouched, smiling now. Rachani collapsed to her knees. "Why won't it burn?" Buapan stood frozen. Because it isn't the portrait anymore. Then what is it? It's a doorway. That night, they brought the photo back inside, not by choice, but because it returned. By morning, it was already hanging back on the altar wall, centered, perfectly level, its glass pristine, its subject now fully grown, Dao, or what used to be her. Looked like a young woman now, hair down, uniform gone. She wore a white funeral robe, her hands folded gently in her lap, and behind her, barely visible, another figure, shadowed, lurking, fingers resting on her shoulders. No face, only a gaping mouth. Rachani left the house that afternoon and never came back. He didn't pack, didn't speak. He simply walked to the road, barefoot, eyes glazed. The last thing he said before disappearing into the tree line was, "The door won't close until someone walks through it." Rachani tried holy water next. She gathered monks from neighboring villages. They came reluctantly, none daring to stay more than an hour. They chanted, sprinkled salt, read scripture, hung prayer flags from the windows. Nothing changed. Dao's image remained. Her eyes never blinked. But now, in some angles, she appeared to be smiling with her mouth closed. And in others, it was slightly open, just enough to whisper something you couldn't quite hear.
unless you were alone. Rachani heard it first. One night, sitting in the altar room, she closed her eyes just for a moment, and the voice came, inside her left ear, cold breath on her neck. You didn't want a daughter. You wanted an apology. She turned. No one. But the air behind her was wet, and her shoulder, fingerprints. The next night, Manoi vanished from her room. They found her outside, standing in the fire pit, eyes open, unblinking, the ashes beneath her feet ice cold. She was humming Tao's lullaby in reverse, and in her hand, clenched tight, was a burned piece of the photo. Only the edge, no image, just the glass, still cold. Buapan prepared one final ritual. We cannot destroy it, she said, but we can seal it. Seal what? Rachani asked. The memory, the ritual, the grief, all of it. But that means forgetting her. No, that means letting her go. I don't know if I can. Then she'll stay. But it's not her anymore. No, it's the part of you that refuses to grieve properly. Buapan handed her a knife, not to harm, but to cut the thread, a strand of Rachani's own hair, to mix with oil and soot, to write the final mark on the altar door, the exit wound of the house. At midnight, the ritual began. Buapan painted symbols on the altar. Rachani lit the candle, and the portrait, it began to change. Not dramatically, just enough. Tao's face began to weep. Thick black lines ran down her cheeks. Her mouth widened, and behind her the shadow grew larger. It reached forward, pressing its fingers to the inside of the glass. Cracks formed. The glass groaned, and Buapan screamed, "Now! Cut the thread!" Rachani sliced the strand of hair, dropped it in the flame, and the portrait shattered. Glass flew backward, the wall cracked, the candle extinguished, the house went dark. And somewhere far beneath them, a door slammed shut, hard enough to rattle the earth. When the light returned, the frame was gone. Only the nail remained, and etched in the wood behind it, 3 words, scrawled in soot: "You remembered me."
The air was still. No more footsteps in the hallway. No more laughter in the walls. No more photographs changing on their own. But Rachani knew better than to believe in silence, because something remained. Something waiting. Not behind the portrait, not beneath the altar, but inside her. She could feel it now. Every time she stood near the old tamarind tree, every time she looked at the nail in the wall where Tao's photograph used to hang, a weight, a cold breath behind her ribs, a wordless presence just out of reach, not hostile, not malevolent, just unfinished, like a sentence stopped mid-syllable. Buapan said nothing at first. She watched Rachani from a distance, the way her eyes flickered, the way her fingers twitched, the way her voice echoed a fraction too long in a quiet room. "It didn't end with the fire," Rachani whispered one morning. "No," Buapan said. "It ended when you turned away from her in the flames." "What do you mean?" Buapan sat beside her, She didn't need to be banished. She needed to be heard, completely, without fear, without interruption. You opened the door, Rachani, but you never let her finish walking through. So what now? You let her in, fully, one last time. That night, the ritual was simple. No fire, no salt, no ink or ash, only breath, only surrender. Buapan laid out a circle of dried flowers, jasmine, lotus, and marigold, each one tied to love, to mourning, to memory. In the center, Rachani sat cross-legged in silence. No candle was lit, no chant was spoken, only the wind and the moonlight, and the sound of her own heartbeat slowing, becoming smaller, like a lullaby hummed in reverse. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Tao, I'm ready." And Tao came. It wasn't like before. No flickering candles, no freezing cold, no shaking limbs. It was gentle, a warmth in her chest, a sigh in her lungs, a hand, small, soft, pressed lightly against her shoulder. Then her voice, but not spoken out loud, spoken through her. "I was scared." Rachani nodded. "So was I. I waited. I know. You left too soon." Tears spilled from Rachani's closed eyes. "I didn't know how to say goodbye." A pause. Then say hello instead. Her mouth moved on its own, words rising from a place deeper than memory. The chant, the final verse of the pop roar, spoken not in fear, but in clarity. A mother's voice, a daughter's soul. And with each word, the flowers in the circle began to wither, not from decay, but from completion, from purpose fulfilled. The last line hovered on her tongue, and Tao whispered, "Say it for me." Rachani spoke, "Let light find what love cannot hold." A final breath escaped her lips, and then silence. The next moment, she opened her eyes. The flowers were dust, the circle was gone, and Buapan stood beside her, tears in her eyes. "She finished it." Rachani nodded quietly. I held her, and then she let go. That night, the dreams were different. No drowning, no dark staircases, no photographs, just a memory of Tao as a toddler chasing butterflies across a temple yard. Her laughter real this time, no echo, no distortion, only joy. And as she turned and waved to her mother, she said, "I remember now. That was enough." And then she was gone, not vanished, just free. In the morning, the house felt different, smaller again, quiet, still breathing, perhaps, but softer now, like an old man resting, or a heart that had finally learned to beat for itself. No photos on the wall, no whispers in the mirror, only sunlight and peace. But on the altar, someone had left something, a single white petal, resting where the frame once hung, and underneath, traced in fine white ash, "Thank you, Mama." Ash doesn't scream. It doesn't cry. It doesn't beg or whisper. It simply waits. It clings to the edges of memory. It settles into cracks in the floor, into the creases of a mother's hand,
into the quiet moments when no one is speaking, and somehow the silence still feels full. Tao was gone, truly gone. The ritual had been completed, the portrait shattered, the voice silenced. But the house still remembered, not haunted, not cursed, just heavy with memory. Like a photograph still hanging in your mind long after the frame has been taken down. Rachani swept the altar room every morning. There was no more portrait, no more circle of flowers, just a clean, bare wall and the scent of incense that never fully faded. Sometimes she found ash gathered in corners, fine, white, not from burning, but from settling, as if the house exhaled it during the night. And if she leaned in close enough, sometimes the ash moved. She told no one, not even Buapan, because the fear was gone. Only sadness remained, and grief is quieter than fear, but far more persistent. Pricha returned after 11 days. He didn't explain where he'd gone, didn't need to. He stood at the doorway, eyes sunken, feet muddy, holding a wilted lotus flower in his hand. He said nothing, just knelt before the altar and placed the flower where the photograph used to be, and whispered, "She would have been 12 today." Rachani stood beside him in silence, and for the first time in weeks, they held hands. Menoi began to speak again, not often, but with clarity. She remembered Dao's laugh, her favorite songs, how she used to draw stars on the walls when no one was looking. She said the house felt lighter now, but also lonelier. Sometimes she left offerings near the tamarind tree, a candy, a crayon, a folded paper crane. And each time by morning, the offerings were gone. No wind, no birds, no tracks, just the faintest trace of ash left behind. Chai, the youngest, drew a picture one afternoon, a tree, a house, and a little girl in white standing by the window. "Is that Tao?" Rachani asked gently. Chai shook his head. "She's not Tao anymore." "Then who is she?" He thought for a long moment, then said, "She said she was just a memory now." Did she say anything else? Chai smiled, a gap in his teeth. "She said not to be sad. The ashes are warm." The house no longer groaned at night, but it sighed. Sometimes when the wind passed through the window just right, it carried a sound, faint and low, like a child humming to herself from far away. Rachani didn't fear it. She welcomed it. Each breath a reminder that Tao had been here, that love leaves fingerprints, even on air. One morning she woke before sunrise and walked barefoot to the altar. She hadn't cried in days, but that morning she did. Not because of fear, but because of the smallest thing. There, at the base of the wall, was a tiny footprint, pressed into the ash, and beside it, a single jasmine petal, still fresh, still fragrant. Buapan came to visit not long after. She was older now, more tired than before, but lighter. She brought Rachani a gift, a small wooden carving. It was a mother holding a child, carved from tamarind wood. "It's for the altar, to honor, not to bind." They placed it on the shelf together. No candles, no prayers, just quiet, just memory. Later that night, the wind stirred through the house. The beams did not creak, the lights did not flicker. But in the silence, Rachani heard a voice, clear, calm. Not from the walls, not from the shadows, but from inside her own breath. Thank you for letting me go. She closed her eyes, placed her hand over her chest, and whispered back, I never stopped holding you. The next morning, a new jasmine tree had begun to bloom near the tamarind tree. No one had planted it. No one knew how it got there. But its flowers bloomed white and full, even in dry season. And when the breeze carried their scent through the window, the house felt like home again.
Years passed. The house no longer whispered. The altar no longer wept. The jasmine tree bloomed every season now, soft white petals falling like snow onto the earth where Dao's photograph had once been buried. No one spoke of the fire, or the ink, or the dreams. Because some grief fades with time, and some becomes part of the home. Rachani aged gently. The silver in her hair came quietly, without warning. Her hands stiffened, her back curved, but her eyes stayed sharp. Sometimes in the early morning, she sat by the window, cradling a cup of tea, watching the shadows move between the trees. She never told anyone what she saw, only that they felt familiar. One spring, a child was born, a girl. Her name was Anang, which meant gentle beauty. She was Rachani's granddaughter. Chai had grown, started a family of his own, and built a small home beside the old one, careful not to cut down the jasmine or tamarind trees. From the moment Anang could walk, she avoided mirrors. She laughed when no one was around, and she always knew things. Not in a strange way, but in the way a child sometimes speaks of places they've never been, of memories they should not own. On her first birthday, Rachani placed a tiny gold bracelet around Anang's wrist, a family heirloom Dao had once worn. It was too loose, but Anang never let them take it off. It's mine, she said softly. She gave it to me. No one asked who she was, but they all knew. One evening, as the family prepared a meal for Anang's birthday, Rachani walked into the altar room to light incense. It had become a space of peace now. No more chanting, no more portraits. Only the small wooden carving Buapan had once brought, the mother holding her child, and a bowl of fresh water that was never allowed to run dry. But something was different that evening. There, leaning gently against the wall, was a photograph, wrapped in silk, clean, untouched. Rachani's hands trembled as she reached for it. She unwrapped it slowly and froze. It was a portrait, taken recently, but no one remembered taking it. The subject? Anang, sitting on a stool in the altar room, smiling softly, wearing the gold bracelet. Her eyes were bright, knowing, peaceful, but behind her, just like before, a shadow. Not menacing, not sharp, just there, shaped like a girl in a school uniform, standing quietly, watching over her. Rachani said nothing. She didn't cry, she didn't scream.
She simply placed the photo on the altar, lit 3 sticks of incense, and whispered, "Thank you for coming back the gentle way." That night, Anang drew a picture. It was simple, crayon on paper. 2 girls, holding hands, one smaller, one older. The younger had a gold bracelet. The older had 2 braids and no face, just a soft outline. When asked who it was, Anang smiled. "That's my big sister." "You don't have a big sister," her mother said. "I did, but she had to go." "Go where?" Anang pointed to the altar. "In there. But it's okay. She said I don't have to be scared anymore." Sometimes, when Rachani sat quietly in the altar room, she heard 2 sets of footsteps running in the hallway. Tiny, bare, giggling. Not haunting, not sad, just playing. And sometimes, at dawn, the floor creaked near her bed, and she smelled jasmine, and she smiled. Because some spirits come back to torment, but others come back just to make sure you're okay.